like a keeper? Oh hi gang! This is the week of Easter and it's the kind of milestone in the gardening year. Easter long weekend is normally the time that people get out and really start gardening. So this week out go some of the more hardy vegetables, and we'll put some things out under a bit of cover that are a little bit more temperamental. There's so much to do this time of year. It's just alive with energy.
Bok, I'm Mandy O. This is Grow, Make, Cook, and welcome to my garden. I grew up in Australia in a permaculture family, but after we got married, Mr. O and I moved here to his home country of Croatia. I am a passionate and hands-on homemaker and gardener, and I love life's simple pleasures. So join me on my journey, and together we can learn to grow, make, and cook.
This is the third week in April, or Travan.
Recording.
Happy Easter, or Sretan Uskers. The cherry blossom season has truly begun here, and these billowing clouds of white beauty are just breathtaking. I adore this time of year when the flowers have all opened and the air is so sweet with the perfume. It just floats on the breeze like a pleasant perfume. It's a kind of magic. So in this end of what has been up to this point only my seed bed, so all I've had in here is just my chives and baby lettuces, but what I want to do is turn this into my beets bed. So what I'm planning to put in here are my beetroot and my silver beet. My beetroot this year, I started inside. Now, it needs about 8 degrees Celsius to germinate and to really get going. So I started them just on the windowsill, but they've almost all got 2 true leaves, which you can see here. They're tiny little ones, but because they've all got true leaves now, it's time that they can go out into the garden. Now, I started them in those folding paper pots that I showed you how to make at one point, but they've been in these folded paper pots for probably 3 weeks now, and they're really starting to fall apart. You can't really pick them up and handle them anymore. So with these falling apart big clumpy bits of paper, I'm just going to throw those in the compost, and the rest of that can all just get planted along with the beetroot. Now, beetroot seed is actually a clump of seeds, so you often get this, where a few seedlings all kind of clump together because they've come from the one seed that you plant. So I try and separate them out a little bit so that each beetroot has a chance to swell and grow into that delicious red vegetable that we all love. It's so sweet. In this house, I really think that you can't grow too much beetroot. So, as you can see, I'm putting these ones in a full handspan apart to give them the room that they're going to need to become great big plants, whereas the little beetroots that will grow into little beetrooty deliciousnesses, they've got less space. But they are the same family, so they will go together for this little bit. Now, my blitva, or silver beet, or Swiss chard, I've been growing to start in these, they're old toilet rolls where I've just folded the bottom a little bit. And so to plant these, I'm doing it a little bit differently than I did for my paper pots. All I'm doing is taking the very hard top bit off, which pulls off easily. And then I unfold these bottom bits just so that the roots can get out. You can see that they're starting there to get out the bottom anyway, but just to make it easy, and then I plant the whole tube. So I'm disturbing the roots a lot less than you normally would when you pull out, you know, a plant from a pot and you move it about and try and keep the roots on and then pot it up or plant it out. So this way of doing my seedlings, which that's not a very straight line, but it doesn't matter, I think it's going to give me a much faster growing and a stronger growing plant, because I'm not fiddling about with the roots as much. We'll have to see how it goes though. And like always, everything when it gets planted gets a good soak. I'm so happy with the way this part of the spring garden is starting to come together, with the rhubarb coming up and my black currants and these, which I am absolutely delighted by. These little babies here, right next to this snake's head fritillary, which has opened up and no longer looks much like a snake's head. But here are really exciting things. These are species tulips. These are tulips that are very similar to the ones that you would find naturally occurring and that are wild in nature. And so they haven't got those nice thick leaves that my more bred and structured tulips and the things that people recognize as tulips are now. But I still think these little yellow and white species tulips are like little stars, like little gems shining out in the spring garden. I'm loving that they came up. Now, down here by this glorious white and purple tulip, I am digging really rather a large hole. And it's for really rather a small pot at this stage. So this here will be enormous. This is a spaghetti squash. These are the seed saved ones I did last year. So these are my own spaghetti squash that I regrow every year. They're one of our staples and I adore them. But they're really, really hungry. So for this tiny little pot, I've got an enormous pile of compost and I'm really going to pack it in. I'm also going to feed this plant. So these guys love really good, rich soil. So throw some compost in, dig it in a bit, and then throw some more in. You can't overfeed a spaghetti squash. It's a bit like a zucchini in that respect. They're the same family after all, but you really just can't give them too much goodness. They'll just eat it up and keep producing more and more and more squash, which is what we want. And this guy will probably lean out this way onto this bit of wild grass here. So I'm hoping he'll just kind of creep across the edge of the bed and sprawl everywhere. So we'll see how that goes. Now, when I'm planting these guys, I kind of plant them in a bit of a dip. So actually that system is great. He's really ready to come out, this guy. So I plant him a little bit lower, and then when I backfill, I like to make kind of a donut shape around him so that when I water, all of the water sits down into that donut and it really soaks in right where that plant needs it. So by making a little bit of a ring around the edge, I can see more clearly where his roots are, because when the plant gets really big like this, you won't see it at all. So if I make a little donut like that, you can see where the roots are. You can really, really feed and water them, and it'll allow me to be a bit generous with the mulch and the compost. I'm just loosening up the ground here and adding a couple of good handfuls of my own homemade compost to this little patch of earth down here by the tulips and my kale, and I've got some sage down here on this edge of the bed. And this is because I'm planting out some of my tall peas. Now this variety is Hendrix, and I grew them last year, and these guys are really ready to come out of the pot. I can see the roots starting to poke out the bottom of the thing. So I've popped them in here with a bit of support, but they're not really done as much as I'd like in there. They've kind of gotten a bit thin and a bit scraggly, so it's time to pop them out into the ground. What I'll just do is kind of divide them up by grabbing the soil. So with these soft plastic, they're actually fruit trays, but anything that's a soft plastic like this where you can slide the whole thing out allows you to then divide up your plants little bit by little bit as you want them. So these guys, I just kind of grab the soil around the plant, and there he is. There's my baby pea plant, all ready to plant out. This is really good in place of something like a seed tray, which seed trays can be quite expensive and really quite, I feel, wasteful really, because they're just a plastic tray and you get so many of those in the supermarket. And that's a little cluster of my trusty Hendrix. They're the same peas I grew last year in the ground. I'll give them a good soak now, and they will climb up really tall, and hopefully I will train them up into this little plum tree just here. But I will need to put some bigger supports in. These guys, these little temporary supports that I've put in this tray, are not going to hold them for very long. Now, the rest of these peas are going to go into a completely different part of the garden. So I'm going to pop them back in there just for now and pop a little bit of compost around them just so that they don't fall apart. And I'll get to planting those in maybe a half hour or so, but I don't want them to dry out in the meantime. So they'll be there in the shade while I get on with some other jobs. The grass is certainly starting to grow, which means that if you're planting things like potatoes or anything like that, this is the time of year to get it in. It's a nice little rule of thumb, that one. If your grass is growing, potatoes need sowing. But this year I haven't shitted any potatoes. I haven't grown any potatoes on at all this year. So this will be the first year, I think, here that we haven't grown potatoes. But it is the time for cutting your grass. Now, if, like me, you've been very, very lazy with your grass edging and all of that over winter, then now is the time to start getting into this. Now, I'm actually cutting this quite long. It doesn't look like it, but I am. I've left probably this much in length, and I'm cutting it just around the edges with scissors. And this is a good idea for every grass that you cut at the moment. Set the blades on your mowers really quite high as you can for your first cut of the year. This way you're doing as least damage to the ground and you're not scraping it, you're not killing back the roots of your grass. You're just giving it that first gentle haircut for the year. And these guys really need a haircut. I guess that's about all we've got time for today. So, if you like what we're doing, please like the video. If you would like to see more of us and you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you want notifications, use the bell icon below. And so, until next time then, do widzenia.